This is one of those scenarios where you wish you had a plan, and I get asked this question quite a lot. And surprisingly, also for the technical questions, I mean, what can you do if you don't have an answer to whatever that interviewer is going to ask you in a job interview? And in today's video, I'm going to give you some hopefully interesting insight as to how do you go about these things. Rule number one, never ever immediately say that you don't have an answer for this. And the simple reason for this is that one of the essential things that recruiters and interviewers are looking for these days is that you're really genuinely interested to get the job done and you have the necessary toughness to get the job done. And one thing you should keep in mind, especially for behavioral questions, is that they are designed in such a way that everyone must have an answer for it, even if you're a recent graduate. So the problem is not whether you have an answer, but how quickly can you find that answer. And this is actually key to understand. For just quickly on the technical side of things, for the technical questions, this advice more or less applies as well, in the sense that even if the question is what's the command to reroute traffic on a Cisco ASR 1000 router, okay, it might be a tough question even for a sysadmin to answer, but the more you think about it, the better the chances that you will come up with something for this. For example, I had some flavor of this question from candidate. What did they ask me this? Because I have no idea. This because I don't work with these routers. Okay, but as that specific candidate. Okay, but what routers do you know? I know the other ones. All right, so you know the other ones. Well, what if you told them, hey, in my day-to-day job, we have hundreds of routers, but they are a different brand because we have exclusivity with a different manufacturer. However, this question is only one click away, one Google search away from finding out the answer for. So I believe it's a huge difference from coming up with a straight answer. I'll be honest with you, I have no idea how to route traffic on a Cisco ASR 1000 router. So there's a big difference between saying I have no idea about this and saying, hey, listen, in my day-to-day job, I do this quite a lot. I do this quite often. I work with routers pretty much on a daily basis, and the equivalent comment of this or on a different brand, the equivalent comment on this on a different brand would be this comment. And it's, to be honest with you, I believe that the answer to your specific question is just one Google search away. So I believe this is something that I can definitely quickly adjust for, with the brands or with the manufacturer that you're working with. So I'm very confident about my capabilities to get the job done, as I've successfully done in my role for the past, 2 years or so. So there's a huge difference between saying I don't know and making your answer sound like this is something that you can easily acquire expertise for. And keep in mind that an interviewer usually listens for 3 things when they ask you a question. The first thing is that are you someone they would enjoy working with on a day-to-day basis? And if you say, no, I have no idea about this, well, I don't think you're playing your full cards here. The second one, are you someone who has the necessary toughness to get the job done? In other words, can you fight to advance your goals? Fight, I'm not saying in a bad way, but do you have the toughness required to get the job done? Because, it's a corporate environment after all. Yeah, so you know what I mean. And finally, the third reason is, do you have the necessary skills, the technical abilities to get the job done? And more often than not with these technical questions, it's assumed that this is what you're screened for. Now, what can you do if you generally don't have an answer for this? And what are some other pieces of advice that you can take into account when getting asked such a question? Well, there are some very interesting approaches here. The first, and before I forget these things, if you're preparing for a phone interview, you should use cheat sheets. That is, you should get lists with most commonly asked questions, answer them, put them on some cards and keep them around you for the phone interview. That's very common, and even interviewers, even recruiters recommend this to a certain extent. The other strategy that you want to make sure you employ here is that you want to show them that you really want the job. And while this might not sound like a big deal to you, it is a huge deal. Engagement is a huge problem in today's workplace. So smart employers will always prefer hiring people that have good potential as opposed to people that are overqualified for the job. So this is where you could also move the needle. But usually the most relevant piece of advice here, and what will apply in most cases when you don't have an answer to a question, is that your strategy must be always around winning time. You want to win time to remember an answer to a question. Remember I said that for behavioral question, tell me about time when, it's impossible not to have a question, not to have an answer actually. It's all about how long it takes you to come up with a great answer. So what are some ways that you can win time when getting asked a question about this? The first one, and probably one of the most commonly used, is to simply repeat the question out loud, and you don't have to hurry on this one. So tell me about the time when you failed, right? I just want 5 seconds. Those 5 seconds could be used to think of a proper scenario where you failed, where you feel comfortable on a scenario that you feel comfortable talking about. And this is one thing. It is also recommended that if you don't have an answer, you could simply ask, can I get a few seconds? Can I get 10 seconds to think about it, please? This is not unheard of. This is actually quite common. Just don't ask for it, be polite, make conversation here instead of just doing nothing. The other thing is follow-up questions. Some questions, or let's take for instance, tell me about the time when you failed. One follow-up question could be, doesn't necessarily have to be a recent one, because interviewers prefer recent experiences because that's the definition of behavioral interviewing. They are looking at your past experiences to predict your future performance on the job. Ask them, is it mandatory to have a very recent one? And another follow-up question, that could also further win you more space, more materials to think about it, is, does it have to be from your professional experience necessarily? Which most often will be the case. But anyway, it's worthwhile trying on whether they would feel comfortable with some ladies. And anyhow, you would win at least 10 seconds to further think about an example that you'd feel comfortable to talking about. And there is another strategy here that also is people, especially for senior roles, tend to employ quite a lot, especially ones with consulting backgrounds, is that they would start to talk about the hypothetical situation first. So, for example, when you're getting asked, tell me about the time when you failed, you could go something like this, although it won't be the ideal answer. Yeah, of course, we all have failures in our careers, and I genuinely believe these are unique moments where I can get the time to think about it and use it as a factor of growth on my trajectory. So again, I just want 10 seconds by talking generally about this. And then, of course, you would have to go with, I can certainly think of a specific time when I did this, I failed at this, and so on and so forth. So talking about the situation in general context could win you. I mean, you could introduce there 1 or 2 sentences and you could win 5, 10, or 15 seconds. Again, the goal is to remember the best possible answer, or to have the best possible answer whenever you have to do it. And more often than not, these answers are in the star format. So early in the beginnings, when I was recommending people what to do, and I was thinking about myself what's the best way to answer this question, I was quite hesitant about the star format. But to be honest with you, the more I practice this with people, the better it gets, because this is actually the best way I know that allows you not to forget a certain part of your answer. So if you're struggling to find out an answer, well, at least you'd better make sure that it's a proper star format. So that's why the star, or even the SAR, if you want, the task is not that important, but it's important to keep the situation, the action, and the result in one piece. And you'll be surprised how often it happens that people forget about the result section. One advice, one friendly piece of advice here is that unless you really know what you're doing, you shouldn't invent things on the spot. I find this tendency quite often in my coaching sessions. And people tell me, hey, Dan, I'm trying to invent something on the spot. I tell them directly, hey, you don't seem like the type of person who can invent things on the spot, who can sustain not only a great example in the beginning, but also the follow-up questions. So unless you really know what you're doing, I would definitely be against inventing things on the spot. I would rather be on winning time here, coming up with a late answer, but with a strong one, with a genuine one, than inventing things on the spot, generally speaking. The other thing you don't want to do when you're getting stuck in a job interview is to lose eye contact. Notice how you become slightly disengaged in our conversations because I didn't watch the camera in display in this case. So this is exactly the same thing as it would happen in a normal conversation, in a face-to-face conversation. Now, I'm not saying you should look 100% of the time at your interviewer. It's not YouTube, but I'm saying that you should keep eye contact. As a general, you should not forget. You should not look on the walls, on the surroundings all the time while thinking about the question. You could look somewhere else for a few seconds, but not all the time. That's what you don't want to do, because your goal, after all, is to create a conversation here. So the better the conversation gets, the better also the outcome, so long as your answers make sense. Once you do get an example, try to make it quantifiable. The best way to determine whether an example is good or not is whether if it's quantifiable or not. If you cannot quantify it, most likely is a so-so example. Now, with the exception maybe with tell me about time when you had to apologize to someone. But still, even when talking about interpersonal relationships, there still you can quantify things more often than not. Of course, I would stress this once more. Use the STAR method. It's a very recommended method, and if your interviewer is trained to listen for STAR answers, if you give them a STAR answer, that can only play to your advantage. There are some exceptions for super senior roles where you can complexify things, or there are better ways to talk about this, but I don't think that's the subject of this video. And last but not least, once you get an answer, or once you're communicating, again, once you are back on the right track, be confident. Be confident. Confidence sells. Confidence sells a lot. Like, people with energy tend to get the jobs a lot more, incredibly a lot more often than other people. So be confident, build rapport, and you should be just fine. So there you go. This would be some hopefully interesting pieces of advice as to how do you go about when getting stuck in a job interview. And if you want to support this channel, please also feel free to share your interview outcomes in the comment sections of the videos. Thank you.